Hello and welcome to Global News in Zuma, Nigeria. The headline says Biden to open embassies in Cook Islands, Niue. Myanmar's diaspora support democracy struggle. Russian schools becoming highly militarized. Pay climate tax, Gordon Brown to rich oil nations. And Niger, France to extract troops and ambassador. On politics in the United States, the President of United States, Joe Biden, is set to announce the opening of new embassies in the Cook Islands and Niue as part of a charm offensive to block Chinese inroads into the South Pacific. The announcement about the latest diplomatic missions on Sunday came as Biden was ready to welcome Pacific Island leaders to Washington, D.C. for a two-day U.S. Pacific Island Forum summit. Talks are anticipated to deeply focus on the effects of climate change in the region. Biden has put a premium on boosting ties in the Pacific amidst increasing U.S. concerns about China's growing military and economic influence. Plans about the embassies were confirmed by two senior administration officials who spoke on condition of anonymity before the official announcement. Karen Jean-Pierre, White House press secretary, said Biden will use the summit to improve relations with the Pacific Islands and deliberate how we address complex universal challenges like addressing the existential threat of climate change, advancing economic growth, and promoting sustainable development. On Sunday, the leaders were scheduled to be feted at the Baltimore Ravens football game and to visit a Coast Guard quarter in Baltimore Harbor for a briefing by the commandants of the U.S. Coast Guard on the fighting unlawful fishing and other maritime issues. Pacific Island leaders have been critical of rich countries for not doing enough to control climate change, despite being responsible for much of the problem and for profiting from loans provided to vulnerable nations to mitigate the impacts. At last year's summit, the White House launched its Pacific strategy, an outline of its plan to assist the region's leaders on pressing issues like climate change, maritime security, and protecting the region from overfishing. It promised the U.S. will add $810 million in fresh aid for Pacific Island nations over the next decade, including $130 million on attempt to impasse the effects of climate change. Director of Pacific Island Programs at Australia's Lowy Institute, Meg King, said that while the U.S. had opened new embassies and USAID offices in the region since last year's summit, Congress had yet to approve the funds. She added that the Pacific Island countries welcome the U.S. re-engagement with the region, but don't want geopolitical tussles to result in an escalation of militarization. The Pacific Island Forum includes Australia, the Cook Islands, Micronesia, Fiji, French Polynesia, Kiribati, Nauru, New Caledonia, New Zealand, Niue, Palau, Papua New Guinea, Republic of Marshall Islands, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. The White House said most members of the 18-member forum were dispatching their top elected official or foreign minister to the summit, but the administration was very disappointed that Solomon Islands Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare, who was in New York last week for the United Nations General Assembly, opted not to stick around for the White House summit, according to an official. Still talking politics, Myanmar was little but a distant memory for Bawit Power until recently. The 26-year-old left her native state when she was 9 and was resettled as a refugee in the United States city of Indianapolis. In the 17 years afterwards, her connection to Myanmar gradually faded, but when the country descended into crisis following the February 2021 military coup, she felt compelled to act, so in December of 2022, she went back to Myanmar. Visiting armed-resistant groups and camps for the conflict displaced during her one-month trip, she became acutely aware of the vast differences between her life and that of her peers who stayed behind. She is part of a diaspora that has mobilized since the coup to sustain a pro-democracy movement that has received limited international support. Research published last December by the International Crisis Group, a Brussels-based think tank, identified diaspora contributions as the single most important source of funding for Myanmar's anti-coup resistance. As the military fights resistance with arson and bombings, diaspora groups have also been critical to the humanitarian response. A February 2022 study by Diaspora Emergency Action and Coordination, a Danish non-profit, found that such groups had been able to access hard-to-reach populations that act relatively quickly while unrestrained by former bureaucracy, meeting needs that were impossible for the international community to address. For some, responding to the coup has always also had a profound personal impact. Though some people came back during the country's political opening that started in 2011, the coup stoked another mass exodus. Nonetheless, Myanmar nationals living abroad are now striving to support what many consider to be the ultimate battle for the country's future. They are contributing to a people's movement that has faced an asymmetrical fight from the start. While millions joined peaceful protests in the immediate aftermath of the coup, the military's deadly crackdowns provoked an armed uprising. Newly formed resistance group wielding hunter rifles and homemade explosives confronted a military with an arsenal of weapons costing over $2 billion. The military has since received a further $1 billion in arms and military equipment, mainly from Russia and China, while resistance groups remain really reliant mostly on self-made and smuggled arms in addition to those confiscated from military forces. Still, they have substantially upgraded their supply while also scaling up the provision of public services such as health and education. These advances, as well as support for an ongoing civil disobedience movement and aid to some 1.6 million newly displaced people, have largely been funded by diaspora contributions, which probably amount to tens of millions of dollars, according to reports. The Myanmar Spring Revolution is the people's revolution, said Koyo Kauzol, a spokesperson for the President's Office of the National Unity Government, NUG. Over the past 2 years, the parallel administration, made up of politicians and activists who opposed the coup, has raised over $156 million, of which a significant portion came from Myanmar nationals living abroad, he said. To generate funds, the NUG has sold zero-interest bonds, held an online lottery, and auctioned off shares of military-owned estates as well as mining blocks in anticipation of a future victory over the generals. It has also raised millions through individual donations. Away from political matters, now Russia's playgrounds are becoming parade grounds. At schools from the Pacific to the Black Sea, children in nursery grade on uniforms and take part in marching practice. Older kids are being taught how to dig trenches, throw grenades and shoot with real ammunition. Service in the armed forces is being glorified in schools across the country. Voluntary companies of teenagers are being formed, and the national curriculum is being changed to stress defense of the motherland. In short, Russia's children are being prepared for war. The militarization of Russia's public schools has deepened since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, driven not by a spontaneous rise of patriotic feeling, but by the government in Moscow. The investment is huge, Education Minister Sergei Kravtsov said recently. There are now almost 10,000 so-called military patriotic clubs in Russian schools and colleges, and 250,000 people to take part in their work. These clubs are part of a multi-pronged effort that includes a radical overhaul of the school curriculum. There are compulsory classes on military patriotic values, updated history books accentuate Russian military. President Vladimir Putin in August signed a law introducing a new mandatory course in schools, Fundamentals of Security and Defense of the Motherland. The Education Ministry subsequently promoted courses as part of this initiative to include excursions to military units, military sports games, meetings with military personnel and veterans, and classes on drones. High school students will also be taught to use live munitions under the guidance of experienced military unit officers or instructors exclusively at firing line, according to the ministry. The program, which has been tested this year and will be introduced in 2024, is intended to instill in the students an understanding and acceptance of the aesthetics of military uniforms, military rituals, and combat traditions, according to an Education Ministry document uncovered by the Russian independent station. Now, ex-Prime Minister Gordon Brown has said the world's richest oil states should pay a universal windfall tax to aid poorer states combat climate change. He said countries such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and Norway benefited from a lottery-style bonanza last year as the price of oil rose. Brown argues $25 billion levy will increase prospects of a deal on a climate fund for poorer countries. His intervention comes ahead of the COP28 summit in Dubai in November. Speaking at last week's Climate Ambition Summit at the United Nations in New York, Secretary General Antonio Guterres cautioned that world leaders were coming up abysmally short in their efforts to curb carbon emissions. He called for the world's biggest emitters to agree on a climate solidarity deal to decrease emissions and support emerging economies. Brown said his plan would stop a stalemate and potential breakdown at COP28 in the United Arab Emirates, UAE, one of the richest oil producers identified. He said petrostates had recorded almost unimaginable profits from the rise in oil price in recent years, with the five richest, which also include Kuwait, doubling their oil revenues in 2022. Quoting figures from the International Energy Association (IEA), he said global oil and gas revenues had soared from $1.5 trillion before the COVID pandemic to an unprecedented $4 trillion. Brown added that the high price of oil and gas had been the major factor in potentially pushing an additional 141 million people around the world into extreme poverty, which is the high range of an approximation from a scientific study carried out earlier this year. He called for the wealthiest oil states to contribute 3% of their export earnings, equivalent to a total of $25 billion in 2022, saying it is the very least they could do. The former Prime Minister, who is a United Nations Envoy for Global Education and World Health Organization Ambassador for Global Health Financing, said the consequences of such a grand gesture will be immense. We will be giving crisis-torn countries where war has been absent in recent summit hope, he said. In African scenes, President Emmanuel Macron has said France will withdraw its ambassador, several diplomats, and finish all military cooperation with Niger following a coup, adding that military cooperation was over and French troops will leave in the months to come. The military junta, which seized power in Niger in July, welcomed the step. The Sunday, we celebrate a new step towards the sovereignty of Niger, the junta said in a statement, according to reports. There are almost 1,500 French soldiers in the landlocked West African country. The decision by Paris follows months of animosity and protests against the French presence in the country, which consistent protests in the capital, Niamey. The move deals a hammer blow to France's operations against Islamist militants in the wider Sahel region and Paris' influence there. But Macron said France will not be held hostage by the pushes, he said, according to reports. The president said he still considered ousted Niger President Mohamed Bazoum, presently held prisoner by the coup leaders as the country's sole legitimate authority, and had informed him of his decision. He described the deposed president as a hostage. He was targeted by this coup d'etat because he was carrying out courageous reforms and because there was a largely ethnic settling of scores and a lot of political cowardice, he said. Niger is one of many ex-French colonies in West and Central Africa where the military has recently seized control. It follows Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali and Chad. The latest coup was in Gabon in August. Anti-French contempt has thrived in the region in recent years, with numerous local politicians accusing Paris of carrying out neo-colonialist policies, a charge denied by France. There have also been concerns in the West over the rising role in the Sahel of Russia's Wagner mercenary group. It is accused of human rights abuses and has been helping some new military regimes. The Regional Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, supported by France, has threatened military intervention in Niger to reinstate Bazoum, but so far it has not acted. Now, several killed in Benin fuel depot fire. According to officials and witnesses, no less than 35 people have been killed in Benin after a fuel depot exploded into flames, sending a black cloud of smoke into the sky. On Saturday, the fire broke out at a warehouse for traffic fuel in the town of Semepoji near the border with Nigeria, where cars, motorbikes and tricycle taxis came to stock up on fuel, residents said. The fire burned down the store and, according to an initial assessment, resulted in 35 deaths, including one child, prosecutor Aldobaki Adambongo said in a statement. Over a dozen others were extremely wounded and are being treated in hospital, he added. Benin's Interior Minister, Alan Saido, said the cause of the fire is smuggled fuel, saying the blaze left the bodies of the victims badly charred. Fuel smuggling is common along Benin's border with Nigeria, a major oil producer. Illegal refineries, fuel dumps and pipelines have sprung up in border towns, sometimes causing fires. The Justice Ministry said it has unveiled a probe to determine the cause of the fire. Edgar Lungu barred from political jogging. Edgar Lungu, Zambia's ex-president, has been warned against his public jogging events, with police describing his walkouts as political activism. The police in a statement said Lungu's walkout sessions were escorted by members of his Patriotic Front (PF) party and without his security officers amounted to unlawful assembly. The former head of state was ordered to notify police in advance when planning to jog in future to ensure public safety and traffic management. Police spokesperson Ray Humunga said Lungu should strictly adhere to security protocols and should refrain from any form of political activism. This comes a few days after Lungu took the government to court after he was allegedly blocked from traveling to South Korea for a conference, a case he later withdrew. After being in power for 6 years, he lost the 2021 presidential election to Hakainde Hichilema. He is widely believed to be planning a comeback in the 2026 elections. The Zambia Police Service has noted with worry the illegal assembly and political activism that was conducted by patriotic cadres on Saturday, September 23, 2023, when the former president Edgar Changwa Lungu was conducting his morning jogging routine. We would like to warn the Patriotic Front cadres that public gatherings and demonstrations, including political events, should be notified to the police as by law established. Failure to do so sums to a breach of the law. This is to ensure public safety, traffic management, and to stop disruptions to the daily lives of citizens. What transpired yesterday, where patriotic cadres went about disrupting the free flow of traffic, amounts to unlawful assembly and going forward shall not be tolerated. Such a procession of a former head of state should be done with his security detail and devoid of political activism. Let's go on a short break. When we come back, I'll bring you more stories from Nigeria. Please do stay with us. You're welcome back. It's Zuma Nigeria, and we begin with NLC persists on indefinite strike action. The Nigeria Labour Congress (NLC) may declare an indefinite industrial by midnight tomorrow, barring any last-minute breakthrough in deliberations between the federal government and Labour over relief procedures following government's removal of fuel subsidy. NLC President Joe Ajaero gave the indication yesterday, according to reports. Ajaero said the federal government had more than sufficient time to resolve the dispute and tackle the concerns of the labour movement, but chose not to do so. But members of the Organized Private Sector of Nigeria (OPSN) stated worry over the looming strike and caution that continuous industrial action was demarketing Nigeria, worsening the ailing economy and weakening the livelihood of the citizens. Though there were signs at the weekend that the federal government was making frantic efforts through unofficial channels to stop the Labour Centre from embarking on the industrial action. In line with the resolutions reached at its National Executive Council NEC meeting on August 31st, NLC had threatened to embark on a total and indefinite shutdown of the country within 14 working days or 21 days unless measures were taken by the government to confront the mass suffering and impoverishment being experienced across the country owing to petrol subsidy removal. On September 5th and 6th, the union first observed a two-day nationwide warning strike to show its preparedness for the indefinite strike later in the month. From all indications, NLC appears to set and declare a national strike by tomorrow if the federal government fails to roll out palliatives for workers in the form of wage award or other measures. The Congress convened an emergency meeting of its NEC on Tuesday to take final decisions on the strike. In a notice for a virtual NEC meeting signed by General Secretary of NLC Ima Ogboja, the Labour movement said it will start deliberations by noon on Tuesday. Apart from demanding reasonable palliatives to cushion the impacts of the fuel subsidy removal, NLC also demanded that the Nigeria police should vacate the illegal occupied national headquarters of the National Union of Road Transport Workers (NURTW) and free its detained leaders. A conciliatory meeting convened by Minister of Labour and Employment, Honourable Simon Lalong, was last week to try to resolve the dispute did not make any headway. Last week, Trade Union Congress TUC also threatened to shut down economic activities in Lagos State today over alleged interference of the state government in the activities of the Road Transport Employers Association of Nigeria. And finally, on the news, Amnesty calls for probe into security lapses. Amnesty International has called on the federal government to probe the security lapses that are allowing abduction in Zamfara State. Isa Sanusi, the country director, Amnesty International Nigeria, in a statement on Sunday, according to a report, said the Nigerian authorities had repeatedly claimed to be confronting the security situation in Zamfara State, but the cruel activities of gunmen told a different story. According to a report in recent times, Zamfara State has consistently witnessed the abduction of students and National Youth Service Corps members. An unspecified number of students of the Federal University of Gusau were reportedly abducted from their rented lodge in Sabon Gida, Bungudu local government area of the state in the early hours of Friday, September 22nd. Meanwhile, troops of the Nigerian army have reportedly rescued 6 females among the abducted university students. Also, 8 members of the National Youth Service Corps traveling from Akwa Ibom State to Sokoto State were kidnapped in Zamfara State to Sokoto State in August 2023. While reacting to the developments, Sanusi said on Sunday the Nigerian authorities must take all lawful measures and do more to rescue and return to safety all the dozens of mostly female students of Federal University Gusau abducted by gunmen in the early hours of Friday. According to him, schools should be places of safety and no person should have to choose between their education and their life. The Nigerian authorities have repeatedly claimed to be tackling the security situation in Zamfara State, but the ruthless activities of government tell a different story. The attack on Federal University Gusau and abduction of students may amount to war crime, and it is a violation of international humanitarian law. It also undermines the right to education. The authorities appear to have learned nothing from the series of school abductions that took place across the northern part of Nigeria. The latest abduction clearly shows that there appears to be no framework in place to prevent further school abductions. The Nigerian authorities must investigate the inexcusable security lapses that allowed this abduction to take place. To refresh our memories, Biden to open embassies in Cook Islands, Niue. Myanmar's diaspora support democracy struggle. Russian schools becoming highly militarized. Pay climate tax. Gordon Brown to rich oil nations. And Niger, France to extract troops. An ambassador. That's all on the news. Thanks for watching. I am Lois Tureki. Enjoy the rest of your day.